6 out of 10 Republicans recommend FTR Radio to everyone they know. The other 4 are rhinos. FTR Radio. Online at FTRradio.com. FTR Radio salutes some of the great Democrat presidents in the radio era. FTR Radio.
You're listening to Liz and Taylor.
Alright, so why can't I get another tattoo? Come on.
Because you get another tattoo, then you start talking another gun.
But not the movie star, the battling duo from the Right War on FTR Radio.
Oh, come on.
You're the one who said it.
That was a joke, partially.
Enlist in the Right War. Won't cost you nothing. Not as good as military service, but it's got to count for something, right?
Good evening, folks. Thank you for listening to FTR Radio. I'm Liz Harrison. This is The Right War, and yet again, no Taylor. He has gone and disappeared. But I do have a gentleman who has quite a bit of knowledge about what has been happening in Baltimore, etc., at least from the perspective of race, and that would be Colin Flaherty. Hello, sir.
Hey, great to be here, Liz.
Great to have you on. And you're going to be better at going and naming the name of your latest book.
Okay, so I wrote a couple books. The latest is called Don't Make the Black Kids Angry. It's all about racial violence, black mob violence, black on white crime, the knockout game. It's about how reporters and city officials ignore, deny, condone, encourage, and even lie about racial violence. So my book, Don't Make the Black Kids Angry, it's kind of a magical mystery tour. It takes you here, there. It's not no big theories, no big solutions. It just kind of says this happened, that happened, this happened, that happened, and it shows how the enormous difference between what you read in the newspaper and what you see on YouTube about what really happened there. And so I've done a lot of writing about Baltimore, which is kind of ground zero for violence and denial. Been writing about the racial violence in Baltimore for a while. It's bad down there. And, but it's happening all over the country now. It's not just Baltimore. And it's amazing. It's amazing how much there is behind it.
I can understand that. I remember it very clearly as a child because my family had come from the north side of Pittsburgh, which they now try to call the North Shore to make it sound better. Yeah, it can't make it better. That's like silk purse out of Sal's ear. But yeah, the neighbors, we had a black family that lived next door, different men all the time, same woman, bunch of kids. And the kids would come out and beat the crap out of me, and then my cousins would go and beat the crap out of them. So basically it was one of those very nasty situations. But yeah, I learned early on, there are certain kids that you just got to avoid. And
well, we talk a lot about racial violence and how people in different groups are affected by it. We talk a lot about Baltimore. Unbelievable amount of black on white crime in Baltimore. Really nasty stuff. A lot of it on video. And one of the chapters in the book, we talk about how 2 years ago the biggest employer in Baltimore was about ready to move out because there is an enormous amount of violence and mob violence in downtown Baltimore. And Martin O'Malley, who was then the governor, now a presidential contender, he told the mayor of Baltimore, the same person who's mayor now, Stephanie Rawlings Blake, he said, "Why don't you put some boots on the ground to get this crime thing under control?" She snapped at him in a way I've never seen a mayor snap at a governor. She said, we're not going to arrest our way out of this mess. And then she started bragging about how under her administration, the number of people arrested went from 100,000 to 50,000. And so this is a crowd that sees everything through the lens of race. And so when Stephanie Rawlings Blake looks out into her town of Baltimore and sees all these people out there rioting, throwing rocks at cops, destroying businesses, setting cars on fire, beating people up, when she sees people do that, she doesn't see felons. She doesn't see predators. She sees victims of white racism. If you look at it that way, then her response makes a lot more sense. How slow she was, how ineffectual she was, how unwilling she was to arrest people for doing some really bad things. So that's the kind of thing I write about. I don't even do that much anymore with the big places like Baltimore, Detroit, Washington, Philly, Boston. That's too easy. That's shooting ducks in a barrel. I do a lot of stuff now in smaller towns. Monroeville, outside of Pittsburgh.
9 miles away from me.
9 miles away from you. So I'd love to talk about Monroeville because that's kind of like what I write about now a lot. But Monroeville, Springfield, Missouri, Charleston, South Carolina, Asheville, North Carolina, all these tiny little towns that are experiencing black mob violence. And one of the reasons I wrote the book was because, we pick up a newspaper every day. We basically read the same story in every major media outlet in the country, which is black people are relentless victims of relentless white racism all the time, everywhere. That explains everything, especially why police are arresting so many black people for no reason whatsoever. That story is all the time. It's relentless. So I wrote this book, Don't Make the Black Kids Angry, to tell people this is the greatest lie of our generation, the greatest hoax of our lifetime, and because there's just so many people saying the opposite of it. So there you have it. Now, what about Monroeville? I want to hear what was going on down in Monroeville. Did you have anything to do with all that violence down there?
Oh, heck no.
Your denial is noted for the record.
Yeah, I'm fully aware of where that comes from. Yeah, I definitely understand that one. And it is part of the reason why my mother's neighbor retired as a police officer when he did. As soon as he found out that they were increasing the number of buses that were going to the mall, and discovered where they were coming from and how often they were going to be going there, he turned in his paperwork for retirement.
When I first started writing about racial violence, I started noticing that a lot of stuff happens on the bus. School bus, but now, the school bus for most kids in this country now is a city bus. They give you passes.
Oh, yeah.
And there's always this shrieking, laughing, attacking the drivers. And that's another thing I don't think people are aware of, what it means to have a bus, to have a bus drop-off place in your neighborhood. It's nasty business.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And as far as Monroeville is concerned, the increases included areas where there is a lot of federal housing. So, yeah, basically because Monroeville in and of itself, there is one section of the municipality that has been relatively low income. Otherwise, it is spread out, and it is scant through the rest of the area, meaning that you'll have like one little pocket of apartment buildings, but it's surrounded by a housing project where the houses are going for $250,000, $350,000, $400,000, which is pretty decent for this area. If you were going to compare it with a large metropolitan area somewhere else, you're getting up close to $1 million homes. So you're talking doctors, lawyers, upper middle class professionals, and then this little project. And they're pretty much not able to do a whole heck of a lot of harm because the police are some of the highest paid in the region. I think that they are still sitting at the highest wage, but they might have gotten beaten out by Mount Lebanon. I'm not sure yet.
You know, Monroeville is weird because from Christmas to Thanksgiving this year, I documented 25 malls that have episodes of large-scale black mob violence. No better, no worse, most of them, than Monroeville. Some of these things were huge, like, hundreds and hundreds of people. Others were smaller. But all this stuff was happening at Christmas and between Christmas and St. Valentine's Day. There was not one case of a white person being involved or an Asian. It's all black mob violence. And it's I kind of talk about it a lot in the book, but it's like, somebody please explain to me what the hell's going on here. Smart? Tell me.
In the case of Monroeville, when the buses started bringing a lot of low-income blacks, honestly, a lot of teenagers, the whites stopped shopping in the evenings. Senior citizens are there to do their indoor walking early in the morning when the mall first opens, and they leave. Once 5 o'clock in the afternoon hits, if you see a handful of white people in the mall, it's shocking.
That mall, that mall is a dead mall walking there.
Oh yeah, definitely, and ironic because it was the set for, what was it, Night of the Living Dead?
Yeah, 1978.
Yeah. I learned how to ice skate on the ice skating rink that they show in the movie.
Is that? Oh, great.
Yep, it's now the food court. So, I think that was a step down.
You know what I haven't heard? I haven't heard anything from the real estate trade, the mall trade groups, because I document black mob violence at malls all over the dang place. And I've only seen one or two articles about this whole flash mob in malls kind of thing. But I don't know if these people, I don't even know what these people who own these malls are thinking. I mean, they're starting to put curfews on, but I think behind the scenes they're kind of panicking what's going on. It doesn't take much to kill them all, I don't think.
Oh, no. And honestly, Monroeville Mall is one after others. Years ago, we used to have Eastland Mall, and that was above a bunch of federal projects up the hill from them. And back in the late 70s, the last department store moved out, so it turned into a flea market for many years. And then finally, I think they tore it down about 3 or 4 years ago, maybe a little bit more than that. There's another one, Century 3. It is still there, has roof leaks, and it's down to the point where they put garbage cans to collect the water when it falls.
Yeah, you just proved like the one thing I always find. So I write about black mob violence all over the country, and I always kind of focus on one thing. Like over the weekend, I just did a video of Charleston, South Carolina. 60 black people rampaged through downtown Charleston, beat up 15 to 20 old white people, and I got the 911 tapes, the whole thing, and a lot of terror, a lot of panic. But during these stories, my favorite part of every one of those stories, you just kind of like mentioned it, which is there's always somebody kind of standing up in the background going, "Oh yeah, that's been happening around here for a long time." So every story I write, and there are hundreds and hundreds of examples in these books about black mob violence, black on white crime. It's always just tip of the iceberg. Because there's somebody always saying, "Oh yeah, that's been happening." Like Louisville, did a big story. I opened up the book with Louisville, big example of black mob violence downtown Louisville. Hundreds of black people rampaging through the downtown, beating up old people, beating up gay people. They went through the newspaper parking lot. The newspaper didn't even have a story on it the next day, and the next day the mayor comes out and goes, "Well, this has never happened before." Then somebody said, "Oh, yes, it has." Then he said, "Well, it wasn't very big." Then somebody said, "Oh, no, it was big." So they kind of keep changing your story, but at the end of the day, there's somebody always going, because I report it all the times it had happened. And another favorite thing I like is when the riot's over. There's always a community meeting, right? We're going to have a community meeting. We're going to, talk about this. 2 days later, 3 days later, in Louisville, they get together. NPR did a big story about it, and they figured out what caused 200 black people to rampage through downtown Louisville, creating mayhem and violence in their wake. And what they found was the one thing they're finding now all over the country. This is the single biggest stated reason for black mob violence and black and white crime. You'll be happy to know it's white racism that's causing everything now. It's not about family. It's not about schools. It's not about income. It's not about fatherlessness. It's all about white racism. I am absolutely convinced a lot of people in this country are not aware of how deep and wide that attitude is, how it's taught in schools, churches, colleges, how it's taught from pulpits, and how harmful and damaging this is. This institutional hostility, this institutional resentment, black on white, it's mainstream now. Mainstream.
I'm not going to go and stick with that as far as Pittsburgh is concerned for one reason only. When Monroeville had their meeting, it wasn't a community meeting. It was a meeting between mall management and law enforcement. And there was a decision made, period. End of issue.
Did they put a curfew on there?
Yes. There are no teens permitted in the mall on Friday or Saturday nights without an adult. Doesn't happen. And they are arresting them for doing it. So, that's it. No more. Now there is going to probably be a moratorium. They're going to sit there and say, you can't have events. The latest one that we had was a shooting that was associated with a group. Yes.
I get all these. I don't have my book in front of me, so some of these things mix into my mind. And near Monroeville, is there a something called Riverfront or Shorefront or something? Another mall area?
Yeah, Waterfront.
Waterfront. Okay, didn't they just have a big deal there about less than a month ago?
They're always a big deal down there.
Okay, the big deal that I did a video on was because they can't go to Monroeville, 100 black people rampage through that mall, throwing rocks at cops and, attacking cops, attacking shoppers, destroying property. It's like second verse, same as the first.
Well, that's because they were being exported from right next door to the waterfront to Monroeville, and then they were told they can't go there anymore. So the housing projects that are right there, my son graciously jokes about this. The town near there are two of them, Homestead and Braddock. And Braddock, my son will sit there and go and say, what's in Braddock? And he says crack houses. So, yeah, we have certain communities in Pittsburgh, certain neighborhoods. Homestead is one, Braddock is one, Homewood is one, Hill District. They are essentially given over to low-income housing, whether it's federal or just a prevalence of Section 8. Homewood is one of the worst. I believe they are down to about 1/4 of the houses in that area are actually occupied. And maybe half of them shouldn't be because of the condition they're in. And there are piles of empty properties because of the houses being razed, because of just totally falling apart. And we had a mayor for a short period of time that basically went out and said, the hell with the damn judicial system. The crack houses were going down. He went out with a wrecking ball and literally just started taking them down. That didn't last very long because he died, and since then it's been battle back and forth in the courts to keep the crack houses there or whatever. But Homewood ended up being featured on Rachel Maddow's show at one point.
Yay!
And the city representative for that area, the city councilman, he was saying, we need more money. I'm sorry. Homewood is an old Exodus place. Homewood and East Liberty had been left behind by whites back in the 60s. They moved to Point Breeze, or they moved out of the city entirely to Penn Hills. Then Point Breeze started going downhill because blacks started moving in there, so there was another exodus, and that went to Monroeville and Penn Hills. So you have all of these white middle-class people moving out of the city, leaving the houses behind. Point Breeze is being rehabilitated because a real estate mogul started buying up houses and selling them to gays in the late 80s, early 90s. The genius of that was that all of the troublemaking blacks decided to move because they were terrified of the gays. They didn't want to get AIDS. So he was taking advantage of their lack of education and understanding of the disease. That's all. Can't blame him. It was a good business move, and it straightened out the community, and it's still getting better as time goes on now. We have families moving in and fixing up houses that have been neglected for years. Homewood, we will never see that. And it's unfortunate because that's where Teresa Hines came from. You know John Kerry's wife and his money supply.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the Hines family, her first husband's family, John Hines, they all came from there. That is where the Carnegies lived. That is where the Hillmans lived. These were all old money, and they were big, beautiful mansions, and they were turned into multi-dwelling apartments, and then eventually turned into crack houses and got knocked down. Homewood Cemetery, it's a who's who of old money in Pittsburgh. Of course, they ran out of room, thankfully, because I don't think that the old money of Pittsburgh would be really happy with having gangbangers buried right next to them. But that's the problem there now. And it just keeps moving out into the outlying areas. Now, you say that, yeah, it's white racism. No. The only people who are deluded like that are leaders in places like Homewood. They call us all a bunch of racist white people. But one thing that was really beautiful that happened when we lost our civic arena and it was replaced with Consol Energy Center was we got to see the true colors of the community organizers in Pittsburgh. They were offered multiple situations that would have improved everything in the Hill District, which is right next door to the Consol Energy Center. They were offered the ability to end up with a grocery store. They were going to put in other shopping venues. They were going to encourage business to move in. And my own organization at the time, because at the time I was running a nonprofit, I was going to get into a partnership with Acer, HP, the real estate mogul who straightened out Point Breeze, and a couple builders, and Macy's, Saks, Fifth Avenue, and Burlington Coat Factory. And, of course, agreements with Scholastic and a few other places. We were going to put in a literacy center that would have been full service. They would have had computers to use. They would have taught reading. They would have taught people how to fill out job applications. They would have coached them on making it through an interview. And the clothing stores were going to give us clothing that would have ended up on their clearance racks and have clothing there for the people to wear on job interviews and to work. And it wouldn't have cost them anything. And of course the building would have been purchased by the real estate mogul and fixed up by the builders. No, they wanted the cash. They didn't want help. They wanted, first they said $1 million, then they said $3 million, and then it started getting ridiculous. But they wanted money. They didn't want help. They wanted money, and they wanted zero oversight. They didn't want to have to tell anybody how they were going to spend it. And at that point, I think that the Pittsburgh public and, of course, the government, Luke Ravenstahl might have been the only good thing he did as mayor, because he was pretty much an idiot otherwise, basically told him to go to hell. And the Hill District stands as it has been, and has a soup kitchen and some community centers made by the churches, but they have had zero help otherwise, except for a little bit of Lemieux Foundation money going to them here and there, particularly when they have sick kids. So I don't know that it is. Anybody would sit there and say it's white racism. I'd say that it's a reaction here. Okay.
I enjoyed that little magical mystery tour we just took through every little nook and cranny of Pittsburgh. I didn't come here to debate. I don't debate. I came here to tell you what I found out in my little travels, and what I documented in White Girl Bleed a Lot. What I document in Don't Make the Black Kids Angry. The people now are blaming everything on white racism. That is a fact. The president did it yesterday. The attorney general did it all the time. Everybody from him down to the little old lady doing the Little League in Chicago are blaming white racism as everything. This is the biggest story in the country now. It's been that way for the last year. Black people are relentless victims of relentless white racism all the time, everywhere. That explains everything. That's the story of Ferguson. That's the story of Baltimore. Okay? That is the facts. Now, okay, if you want to go back to talking about your little magical mystery tour of Pittsburgh, go ahead. I'll sit here and listen. Go.
Okay. Well, what I was trying to say is that maybe the way to go and possibly get them off their little track of saying that is to end up pointing out, well, what you've been pointing out, your information that you're giving out there that basically is showing about the same thing that we saw here. It's just
I have no interest in trying to tell people what to do or say. They insist on going around claiming that they're victims of white racism. I don't care. What I do care is I do not believe most people are fully aware how deeply and widely held that belief is. I don't care. If black people in Baltimore want to blame, and Pittsburgh want to blame everything on whitey, I don't care. I care that lots of other people don't know. And so I don't have any prescription for getting them to stop acting crazy. I don't. And you know what? If you want a prescription for that, turn on the cable news. You can get them 24/7. I heard a big discussion this morning on Good Morning America. There's George Stephanopoulos with some person from Yahoo, from Yahoo News. They were discussing how we should start teaching children at an earlier age about racism and equality and how white people suck all the time. So this is a huge story. It is the biggest lie of our generation, and that's one of the reasons I wrote Don't Make the Black Kids Angry.
Right. So, I'm assuming that you were pretty, well, we talked about it briefly before we came on the air. I'm guessing you're not surprised that they're all ticked off at the hero mom?
I'm not surprised at anything that crowd does. I knew at some point somebody was going to, somebody was going to come in there and rag on her for smacking her kid. But this is something that if you read the black websites and black magazines, it is something they've been talking about, having this discussion about for a while. Like they say, Like, okay, like we're all beating our kids, and apparently this isn't really socially acceptable anymore. But it's weird so when you talk about white racism being the cause of everything, that also means you have to throw everything else out. You have to throw out psychology, for example. So if you have kids that are getting all screwed up because their parents are beating them in a way that we know is bad, their parents have all these habits in their homes that we know are bad. If it's all about white racism, then why do we even care that the parents are beating their 2-year-old kids? So it's just astonishing to me how widespread this attitude is, and how unchallenged it is.
Well, they've been working very hard at it. Of course, they're at this point bringing up this is just a continuation of Jim Crow.
Yeah, whenever I talk about stuff, I'm always talking about something that happened like today, 2 days ago, or my book where I documented over the last 18 months. But then we got people that basically don't know who was president in the year 2008, giving us these long historical lectures about Jim Crow. This kind of fake righteousness it's fraudulent. But they get away with it. They're kind of bullies, right? When they're talking, I can see these. You see these kind of like, you see these reporters, the blow-dried reporters on TV all the time. You see these guys talking about Jim Crow. They're basically making up half the stuff. No reporter ever asked one question. Really? Like John Conyers a couple of months ago in Congress. He's a big congressman from Detroit. He said if you took all the policemen out of the black neighborhoods, put them in the white neighborhoods, that you would get the same amount of crime and the same amount of people arrested. But the only reason that the black crime rate is so high is that white cops are picking on black people in black neighborhoods. And he says this. A lot of people say this. And reporters just sit there with a glaze on their eyes, and not one of them will look at the guy and go, really? Really? And when you talk about this crime thing, their big mantra is white people and black people commit the same amount of crime, but black people get caught more often. And they use one, I kept hearing this, so I started unraveling it and pulling threads out. And that claim all goes back to one little story. It's a story from the Department of Census. See, the census picked every 10 years, they pick out 3,000 families. And they go what I call a super census. So they come into your house and they talk to you for an hour. And they'll say, hey, Liz, do you smoke pot? And based on that survey, they found white people and black people answer that question the same way, basically the same kind. But that's called self-reporting. If you do any research on self-reporting on drug use, you'll see like tons and tons of, legitimate academic medical studies have been done on it. And they all say the same thing. They say two things. One, it's not valid. And two, there's one, this is weird how this is worded. The one group that really, really, really is unreliable and is self-reporting for drug use, and that is African Americans. This is from Johns Hopkins, and it's from the Journal of Addictive Behaviors. So you get this fraudulent study, and you combine it with other stuff, and not one report, and reporters just repeat it. People repeat it. I hear this all the time on MSNBC. Black people, white people commit the same amount of crimes, but police pick on black people. That's why they get arrested more often. That is a lie. It's a part of the greatest lie of this generation.
Well, if they were...
Am I ranting too much here?
No. If they were going to be truthful, then they would do it across... They would pick blacks and whites from multiple income levels and from multiple... types of settings, like rural, urban, suburban. You get my meaning here. In other words, you do a true sample.
Ask any cop the difference between black uses of drugs and white use of drugs. Ask any cop, and they'll tell you that there's a huge difference.
Oh, yeah.
Now, I don't, and whether when they should be arresting people for drugs. I don't even care about that. But that's like their big lifeboat. It's like, oh, the cops are picking on us. Here's proof positive. That's another lie. The fact is, in Baltimore, I did kind of a case study on Baltimore like a year ago, and that's part of the book. And in Baltimore, they have what they call Bronx jury. Have you ever heard of a Bronx jury?
No.
A Bronx jury is when a black jury will not vote to convict black defendants.
Okay.
So in Baltimore is a chocolate town with a chocolate jury pool, and some big group did a study that showed like 62% of the black defendants in a jury trial will not get convicted by a black jury of the charges presented. They always reduce the charges. When you leave Baltimore City, you go to Baltimore County, it's like 2%. They reduce charges 2% of the time. And so that's an enormous advantage. So when you turn on TV and you see people in Baltimore going, we're tired of being picked on by the man. Well, being black in Baltimore gives you an enormous advantage in the criminal justice system. Then you talk about stitches for snitches. You talk about witness intimidation. You talk about the mayor arresting 50% fewer people. You talk about Bronx juries. And all of a sudden, this whole picture of victimhood disappears. And you get a truer picture of the people who run Baltimore is just one place where they actually like the criminals more than the cops. And that has turned Baltimore into a very dirty, brutish, violent place that has everything to do with crime and violence and this kind of hysterical institutional resentment and nothing to do with what these protesters are saying on the streets.
Well, I'd argue that you already had a loaded deck, so to speak, in Baltimore that goes way, way back. And I know I was evil and I was paying attention to the Wikipedia, but it was backed by, you see the little citations and you double check them. They were at least doing legitimate news sources, so I'm going to stick with what they said. But
what they say?
There are 13 cases since 2004 of police officers, no specification on their race, although you could make some guesses based on the names that were listed. But 13 cases of criminal charges being brought against police officers. Over 40 officers. And it's probably significantly over 40 because the one was against an entire unit within their police force. So I'm guessing that they probably had more than 10 in that unit.
So what would they get charged with?
You name it. There was fraud, there were drug charges, there's murder, there is, of course, battering. Girlfriend, what have you. So
this proves, and this suggests that the people on the streets, when they're complaining about the cops, they have some kind of legitimate claim that the police are picking on them because some cops have gotten in troubles over the last 11 years?
No, I'm saying, and also, as of 2007, 43% of the force was black. And apparently the black community hates the black officers more than they hate the white officers. Just saying. So.
There's lots of rap songs about that exact topic.
Uh-huh. Well, I guess I could understand the hatred of black officers if you're in it, because it depends on which way it cuts. Either they're looking at people who they know are wrong and have done things, because these are just the ones that were caught. We know the rules here. There are people who didn't have charges made against them, and there are probably more officers that are dirty.
Listen, hold on, stop. Listen.
Okay.
Cops every day in Baltimore and every city in this country are subject to unbelievable levels of racial abuse, hostility, and violence.
Right.
So if you want to sit here and say, oh, that cop, he got caught doing something bad, and that's why all the people in Baltimore are all pissed off. I don't give a damn about that. Listen, cops are the victims of racial violence. Nobody is saying that.
Right. What I'm trying to say is, and you said that Baltimore is dirty. I'm saying that the corruption runs so deep, and it goes back many years. This is a police force that essentially has gone from its inception from being,
Listen,
white,
I don't know anything
beating
about,
the crap out of
yeah,
everybody.
okay, right. Yeah. The cops are picking up people for no reason whatsoever. In
Oh,
Baltimore,
no.
Everybody's all pissed off. Listen, that's not the case, okay? That's a fairy tale. I don't deal in fairy tales. I deal in facts that I report, that I verify, that I footnote, that I show videotapes on. I don't have time for little fairy tales about Baltimore. Okay? If you've got a story about Baltimore, bring it. If you don't go making up stories about cops, because guess what? Those cops in Baltimore, the ones that are doing the job, those guys are heroes.
Oh, yeah, I agree entirely.
They're the victims of violence and a bunch of BS newspaper guys who perpetuate this image, and they're victims of a city council and a state government that is just totally inept and blatant.
Oh, definitely.
They would let them get away with creating all this racial animosity directed at cops for what? Because, like, black people don't like obeying traffic laws, like we found out in Ferguson? Wow. So...
No, what I'm trying to say...
if you're going to bring the whole cop thing up, it's like, tell me what you're talking about.
This is what I'm trying to say. Let me finish what I was trying to say here.
Okay, get to the point.
Okay, Anthony Batts, the police officer who they brought in from Oakland, California, he had a wonderful record out there. He straightened out that city. He caused a radical decrease in homicides, 45%. Overall crime down 13% in Long Beach. Now, he was brought in 2012. I am saying that I am guessing at this point, and I'm wondering, because he's not going to say it because this is not the kind of man he is. I am guessing that this man has been so hamstrung by that city government and that mayor that are all for the concept of saying that it's because of white people oppressing the black people that we have these problems. And if there is a problem with corruption in the department, they're not letting him fix it, which means that he ends up with having because when you have corrupt officers, my family's been in police departments, you're battling not only the people on the street, but you're battling the people who are corrupt that could hurt you just as badly as the criminals. If that makes sense.
Listen,
so no matter
you
what,
and I, we're in Baltimore right now, and we're walking around. Who would we be in more danger from? The corrupt cops, or the black people that don't like white people walking in their neighborhoods?
Oh, the black people not liking white people.
By a factor of 10,000.
Oh yeah.
I don't understand. So please help me understand why we're bringing up this fairy tale of corrupt cops.
I'm saying, and you're saying, that the cops on the street are getting it from the people on the street, and you've seen it depicted God knows how many times in drama, but it is reality. If you have a dirty officer, they're going to screw their officers they work with if they feel they have to. And that's not a good situation.
Okay, yeah, I know. I saw Bigfoot too. So why don't we just talk about Bigfoot, okay?
Okay.
Why don't we talk about Bigfoot? I saw him. Yeah, I promise. I saw him. My camera broke, but I saw him. I saw him in Baltimore. He was beating up black people. I put your stories about police corruption.
Anyway, what do you think? What do you think about Anthony Batts? Do you think that he's pretty much ready to jump out of his skin and ready to start hurting somebody because of the nonsense?
What's happening in Baltimore? I think to me, the stuff that's important in Baltimore is the fact that there's this enormous amount of racial resentment, enormous amount of black on white crime, enormous amount of black mob violence, and so they bring in some guy from. Did you say Oakland?
Oakland, California, and Long Beach.
Hold on. You keep saying Long Beach. Why? Tell me what's the relationship between Long Beach and Oakland?
I don't know. That is what I guess.
So Oakland, of course, is one of the most dangerous cities in the world. Correct.
Right. Or at least it had been.
Long Beach is not much far behind.
He was chief of police for Oakland, California, and Long Beach. Okay, so apparently they consolidated.
Right. Okay. If he's doing a great job, hey, good for him. All I'm telling you is that if you and I walk through Baltimore right now, it would be an extremely hazardous thing to do.
Right.
And last year a woman last year, Baltimore, like a lot of these big cities, they have these, the gentrification crowd moves in. And a woman last year in Baltimore named Tracy Halverson, she wrote a big story called Baltimore, You're Breaking My Heart. So she wrote about how when she leaves her house in this nice neighborhood, she has to borrow her neighbor's pit bull to walk around the corner. And she talked about how her neighbors are all being robbed, killed, and all this stuff. And so she's a white person, and so but she even she did the required thing for a hipster to do. She said, "Hey, this has nothing to do with race. Okay, it's just crime. It could be anybody." Well, violent crime in Baltimore is a black thing. But anyway, so she wrote this article, and it went viral. So a lot of the black intellectuals in Baltimore, they kind of jumped all over her. They said, Tracy, you said it has nothing to do with race. It has everything to do with race. Your race, your racism for expecting Baltimore to be a safe place, for expecting your neighborhood to be a safe place. You're a racist for expecting that. And that's white privilege that you have. That only white privilege will let you to expect that. So that's how screwed up Baltimore is. That, just the expectation of walking down the street is not something that you and I could have there. A lot of people find that out the hard way.
Yeah. Well, that's the situation that you have here. We have the big riots and everything, and they're involving the black kids in the Monroeville Mall. And the reason why the whites aren't involved is because the whites already figured it out back in the 60s. As soon as the blacks start taking over a certain area, you just avoid it. It's self-preservation.
I mean, and that is a fact. That is a fact that and nobody wants to, nobody. I saw last night in Memphis 2 days ago. There's a story about a whole group of black kids rampaging through this neighborhood in Memphis, beating people up, destroying property, going into stores. And so they went around to the little people in the parking lots and they said, well, what do you think of all this crazy stuff happening in your neighborhood? And the one guy goes, you know what? I'm not going to let anybody force me out of that neighborhood, my neighborhood. I heard that 100 times from 100 different people in 100 different places around the country. But what's the point? What is the point of living in a place if all you do is look over your shoulder? If crime is now, and awareness of crime is now the central organizing feature of your lifestyle, and you're going to accept that just because you have too much pride to move out of there? There are so many people who are trapped in their homes. Yeah. This isn't just old people. It's people with kids. My little town of Wilmington, Delaware, you walk around Wilmington on a Sunday morning going to get some breakfast, and you'll see a dozen kids on their porches. They're not allowed to leave the porch. And that really one of the things that my book is about, and everything I write is about, it's like I really want to confront people with one question. What is normal? Is going to the Monroeville Mall normal, where there's all this black mob violence there? Is that normal? Or is it normal to live where I used to live in California, where nobody I know even ever knew anybody that even heard a gunshot? They didn't know anybody whose house had been burglarized. They didn't know anybody who was ever assaulted. But in places like Monroeville, places like Wilmington, Delaware, Baltimore, this is something people talk about all the time. It's like fabric of their life. They think it's normal. I don't think it's normal.
No, and it's not normal for Monroeville, to be honest. I mean, yeah, they do have the blotter and they have the crime going on in the lower income little pockets around the community. But that town is still largely upper middle class. This is very bizarre for them, even though they've gotten used to the concept of the Port Authority screwing them over and bringing these questionable people into town. But they're going to be thankful, and there's a reason why it was happening during the winter months. Little secret here. Where do they all go in the summer? Well, a lot of the troublemaking blacks that would normally go out to the malls and raise hell end up having people go and buy them, whether it's parents or community organizations or whatever. They buy them season passes for Kennywood Park, the amusement park here in the Pittsburgh area, which is right in the middle of a hellish area. It's technically called West Mifflin, but it's right near Duquesne, which basically is a hellhole. The school was taken over by the Fed. I'm not sure exactly what where their standing is now, but it's a very nasty area. And what happens when you go in the park? Well, they don't have weapons. There's the upside of that, because they do have metal detectors and they are able to detect drugs. So they're drug-free, essentially, unless they throw it over the fence. And then and that's not as easy because they've restricted access near the fences now. But they're drug-free and they're weapon-free for the most part. So there is that. But you've got all of these kids that literally get dumped by the busload at the gates at this park, and they spend the whole day there. And the logic of the community was, okay, we'll put them in there because they can't cause any real trouble because it's an amusement park. They're metal detectors. They can't have weapons. Yeah, they still fight. So it's a very nasty situation. And
I did a chapter in this book on all the carnival, 2 chapters. One on the carnivals and fairs the last 2 years that have had to shut down because of black mob violence. County fairs, local fairs, and the other chapter is on the state fairs and county fairs that wished they had closed down because of this enormous level of black mob violence. Lots and lots of stuff going on video at these fairs all across the country.
Well, if you have time to go and check it out, I would suggest going and digging into Kennywood. Good luck with finding information like in the press, etc. This is something where people literally have to be on the ground, make friends with officers that work there.
Here's how. I mean, if I wanted to find out what was going on in Kennywood, I would just start looking at. I'd start looking at Twitter, and I would start looking at the social media that right now is very, very popular with young black people. That is that is Instagram.
Right. Yeah, you'll have that, but if you want it backed by, actual what's happening with the law enforcement, because
Big shot.
Kennywood
listen,
now.
I appreciate your reporting tips. I've won more reporting awards than you've done shows on the radio. I get people out of prison for reporting. I know the drill. So,
okay.
Thanks for the tip.
Yeah.
But it's like...
It's unfortunate. The park can no longer go and hire people to be security there unless they're officers.
I just think there's a lot of ways to report a story. So that's all I'm saying.
Oh, yeah. But, very ugly situation. Unfortunately, that's the way it goes. And I think that Sandcastle is the other one that's starting to get hit with the same deal, which, of course, is a water park also owned by the same corporation, which is down by the waterfront, that mall that got hit with the mob violence.
Now, and these parks in the summertime, are these crowds integrated? Is it 50-50, 90-10, 100% one or the other? What is the racial makeup of these parks? Are the white parents still taking their kids to these parks?
Yeah. It runs in spurts. It's basically Kennywood Park is the park for school picnics. They come from as far as West Virginia because they don't have any amusement parks there in West Virginia. So
how far is that from Pittsburgh? What, a couple hours?
The farthest they've traveled is about 6 hours with a bunch of buses. So
let me ask you this question. I want to ask you another question. What is going on in California, Pennsylvania?
Yeah, Harvard on the Mon. That is, I'm assuming you're referring to issues with California University?
Yeah, ton of stuff going on with that university and black mob violence on the campus, in the fraternities. And there was even one other thing. I forget what it was, but it was like, whoa, what is going on there?
They radically increased the amount of special cases that they've accepted to the school, as in individuals. Basically, they were building up their sports program.
I was going to say that's a sports thing, right?
Yeah.
Well, it's amazing it's amazing how many colleges in these tiny little towns. I'm thinking of a couple in New York. Some college president decides he wants to have a sports program. So what they do is they go out and import like a crime wave onto their campus.
Yep.
And that's what occurred to me when I read about Pitt, like at the University, California, what's it called? California University?
Yeah, California University of Pennsylvania.
And they had, the black fraternities on campus had parties. They brought people in from all the other black colleges around Pittsburgh. All of a sudden, this town was flooded with black people fighting, destroying property. This is in the fall, and it didn't really get that much attention. I wrote about it, but not, it's just not much attention outside the area. I write a lot about violence on college campuses. A lot of stuff going on. And you know what? I probably did 10 cases of that this year, of large groups of black people trying to get into a fraternity party, then are turned away. And I got a call from a police chief earlier this school year. He goes, "Colin, nobody's reporting this, but I read your book. I'm the chief of police in this town. Here's what happened." And you look at the newspaper and it said a couple kids got into a fight. You listen to the chief, and the chief said 100 black people tried to get into a fraternity party. They were turned away. They waited outside, and as kids left the party, they beat the hell out of them, put them in the hospital.
Good
and
God.
they did it in 3 different fraternities in one night.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, we are completely out of time. So thank you, Colin, for joining us. And you can be found at Colin Flaherty on the Twitter and on the show page. We have all of the information about your book. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a great night, folks.